All right, welcome everyone. Here we are with another monthly PartsEdge webinar. We are very excited about this topic. I think Chuck, smile. You're excited, right? So we're going to talk
Sure.
about calculating the real turn day supply from your DMS and where the fill rate issues are, and basically what you need to know. Chuck really broke down what to do on the individual DMS providers. So hopefully you guys can gain a lot from that. It would be nice to know though, in the chat, if you guys want to share what DMS you are on, so then we maybe focus on that DMS. But we plan to shoot for about 30-40 minutes. So Chuck, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome from wonderful Whitefish, Montana. The subject we're going to cover today is we've done it before in brief. I don't care what DMS you're on. Thank you, Ben, for letting us know CDK. But you're going to see I have a slide for the top 6 of each to be able to calculate out your turns and your day supply. And believe it or not, if you can get to a management report and pull it up, it's right in front of you. It's just a matter of understanding how you would calculate your turns or your day's supply, which basically you just need 2 numbers, and we'll go through that. This is the type of thing where you can request the PowerPoint after this. It doesn't matter what DMS you're on, unless it's something obscure. We got the top 6. So moving forward, just so you know, we basically have a slide for everybody that'll allow you to realistically calculate turns and days supply. So top managers tend to focus on inventory optimization. We work with almost 300 stores on a day in, day out basis. And one of the things you want to make sure of is that, the matrix and the way your system is set up and the way you're ordering and getting rid of things, and we'll go over some of that today, that it helps accurately show your performance on the inventory and just not mask problems at all. And, a lot of times the calculations for those of you that happen to be on CDK or Reynolds, you got that annual activity and benchmark report, and you got that 2213 report, and some of the numbers are good, but the calculations are so far off, and these management reports haven't been updated since like the early 80s. And so obviously a lot of times, and some of you, certainly a lot of parts managers we deal with day in and day out, they go to 20 groups, and we get, whether it's NADA, NCM, or whoever, sometimes they ask for these very unrealistic things, to calculate, and it's next to impossible to try and find that on their management report. Sometimes I think they're trick questions like, can you really come up with a number and bring it to the 20 group? Because a lot of times the way the information is disseminated, with, now you have ASR programs and whatnot, and the way parts are purchased and so forth have dynamically changed so much over the years that these management reports on a lot of the systems are just outdated and not really accurate. So with that being said, thinking about your own inventory now and looking at it, do you experience any of these things, like a low fill rate? Believe me, we'll cover fill rate, probably make you feel better, but if anybody can actually calculate an accurate fill rate, that's really cool, because we don't know of one, and we'll go over that. But you might have poor inventory turns. You look at the bottom, and especially with CDK, I know a couple of you here are on CDK, they only calculate true turns. They don't do gross turns. And I'm going to explain why that is irrelevant anymore, and why you should make your own calculation. Constant over and understocking by ASR programs. What I mean here, and we get dealers who call us up all the time, and they keep saying, I keep running out of this specific product. Maybe it's a filter or set of brake pads, and yet we find it's controlled by rim or aero and whatnot. And we find out that the manufacturers and their ASR program typically will try to understock you. And so sometimes that can cause you to have to go make emergency purchases, put it on a daily order or whatever to get a little bit more depth. If you're having a lot of recurring obsolescence, go back and listen to some of our other webinars about special orders and so forth. But even after cleanup and you look at some of this, you still see that you have a higher day supply and low turns. We'll go over some of that here. Probably make you feel a lot better about coming up with a very consistent way to look at your turns and your day supply. One of the things about the true turn again is it no longer really reflects, what a dealership parts at inventory is actually doing and turning. The reason being, and again, for those of you that haven't heard this before, true turns used to be really important back in the 70s, 80s, even the mid to early 90s, because you used to be able to buy parts when you bought them on a stock order. You got a discount. You got return allowance. You got a discount. Obviously, there was a lot of incentives to buy on a stock order. Typically, you only got like one a week, whereas now stock replenishments every day or whatnot. But that's why true turns were important. Are you buying and optimizing to get the discounts and the return allowance and whatnot? With the inception of RIM and Aero and PartsEdge and ASR 2.0 and whatnot, now whether you buy the part daily, whether it's replenished on RIM or Aero, you still get the same discount. It's just net. There are some programs out there, as you all know, GM's QPO program for collision. Sometimes they might throw out a filter program or a wiper blade program and give you a little bit of a discount. But in reality, anymore, whether you buy it on a daily order, you place a stock order, or it's a replenishment program, there's no difference. So to us, that really removed the true turn calculation, so to speak. So now you really want to look at turns. If there's only one thing you would throw out of your turns as we go forward here, would be if you do a lot of emergency purchasing from other dealers, especially if you're in a major metro and you're local and you buy a lot from them, those are the types of things that you would take out of a turn calculation. But as far as purchasing on a stock order, a daily order, or an ASR, it's all the same. So most dealerships, they pick up very little from other dealers unless they have to, less than 2 or 3%. So I would say don't really worry about it unless it's fairly high. So gross turns, this is, where we're looking at true turns and why it's outdated. And I've already pretty much covered this. But, one of the things I want to tell you about true turns as well is that that's the problem with some of these management reports. I happened to be looking at a Tekion store the other day, and they actually have a turn button, a report that you click on it. And it was amazing how the store showed about 12.8 turns. Little high, looked good, but down below it had true turns at like 1.7. It was so different. And I tore it apart trying to figure out where they were getting that true turn calculation out of Tekion, and I couldn't find it. I was able to look at receipts and purchases and try and figure out what they assumed was coming in, and, I couldn't figure out where they had that calculation factored, but the turns that they had actually was just about right on. So that's where, can you really trust your DMS for some of these calculations? I'm here to tell you, and after we're finished today, I'm going to tell you don't trust it, but you are going to get two numbers that you can pull that you can trust to easily calculate out these turns and days supply. So the gross turns. Remember one thing about your whole inventory. It's an investment, and it should be working to generate revenue, not sitting idle. And one of the things I'll show you, and this, the great thing about doing some of this is down the road, maybe you want to take out some of your idle inventory areas as we start to show some of this. And, just see, I would be shocked because I'll tell you, your manufacturers out there, one of the things we found out with dealing with several of them is it's that old 20-80 theory where 20% of your inventory is generating 80% of your grosses, and that other 80% of the inventory, theoretically, excess inventory, forced or unfulfilled demand and obsolescence, that part of your inventory is really only generating about 20% of your gross. That's why the ASRs are out there. Remember, I've said this 100 times and I'll say it again. ASR programs were designed for and meant to help the manufacturer control the velocity in their own supply chain. And they know what sells, and that's why they're willing to guarantee what sells and put it out there on a program for the most part. Things that don't sell that clog up an inventory that are not guaranteed. So with that being said, one of the things you could actually calculate if you break out your inventory enough is to say, go get me all my ASR inventory and what's the dollar value of it and what did I sell on it. I think you'd find out that your turns are probably 15, 20 compared to once you throw the whole inventory together, it's less. So with that being said, one of the things that always comes up, and this is certainly, worth asking this day and age, is what is an ideal range for where my turns should be? When you got higher gross turns, that means that's, you're selling the same inventory multiple times. Again, it's that 20-80. And just remember, one of the things is that if you reduce excess inventory, unfulfilled demand, and especially have low obsolescence, you're going to have much higher turns. And, if you just double your turns from 5 to 10 by reducing idle capital, you double your revenue basically without increasing your stocking levels. You've reduced the inventory, you're turning it much more effectively, and it's working well. And again, for the purposes of what we see day in and day out, an ideal range for a turn being gross turns, between 6 to 8 times, I would say, is ideal. What we tend to see, and we've seen the extremes on both ends, a lot of idle inventory or obsolete inventory, turns are around 1.5, 2 times a year. That's because this dead stock is just killing it. And then we've seen some people, I had one dealer at one point, and this is about 15 years ago, he actually was turning his inventory 24 times. And this really goes to prove that 20-80 theory. The only thing that he really stocked in inventory, this happened to be a Honda dealer and a very sharp manager, but he could order parts at 4:30 in the afternoon and have them at 7 in the morning. So he only carried maintenance items, oil filters, air filters, brake pads, spark plugs. That was it. And I kept trying to encourage him to build some breadth because I really thought his technicians must hate him because they just have to diagnose a car. If they're doing common maintenance, good. But if they're diagnosing a car, 90% of the time they had to pull it off, put it off to the side, and wait until the morning when the regular parts came in. And so what happened with him, I encouraged him to increase his inventory and build breadth in the inventory so that his technicians would be much happier, and they could fill demand much quicker. And he just balked at that. He ended up losing his job. He worked for a very large dealer group. And of course, the bean counters loved him because he had this incredibly efficient inventory. But his technicians were ready to hang him because he would not put any parts in stock so that they could solve customer problems and get the cars at that time. And they had the worst CSI in the zone due to that. So, when you tend to get up around 10 to 12 turns on your inventory, that more than likely means you're not putting enough breadth in the inventory. And so your technicians, you can start to see technician productivity and efficiency start to drop, because you're being maybe a little too conservative. Even if you got a super clean inventory, one of the things I try to tell any dealership that has really clean obsolescence and low idle inventory is take a bigger risk on putting some parts in to the point that you don't have to worry about obsolescence growing and throwing in a bunch of junk. But don't be afraid to build that breadth to help your technicians. So with that saying, now I got 2 slides here, and these next 2 slides really show you, and this is the type of thing that after we're done, you can request a copy of this PowerPoint or watch it again, whatever. I've had people who actually take snapshots of some of these, but this is how you calculate your turn. You take your estimated annual sales from stock. Like, let's say you're selling $100,000 a month, you multiply it by 12, that's 1.2 million, and you got a $300,000 inventory. You divide that out, and it's, works out to, 4 inventory turns, and that's not per month, that's per year. Okay. The same thing, looking at if it's a higher inventory, it doesn't matter. Some of you might have $1.5 million inventory and you're doing $1 million a month in sales. That'll calculate out really high, but the math works to where you're trying to figure out what your turns are simply by taking your monthly sales times 12, or some of the DMSs actually will analyze that out there to the right. And you take that annual 12-month sale total and divide back into your inventory, and you'll see ebbs and flows over the months based on how busy you're getting, or you did a return or whatnot. You'll see your turns floating between, let's say 5.5 and 6, depending on how you're doing business. And that's a good barometer to kind of look at, where are my ebbs and flows? Where am I slow at certain times? Where am I higher? This is a great way to simply calculate it. When calculating the day supply, it really is just reversing what we just talked about. It's as simple as taking that $300,000 inventory with $100,000 in costs. Now you're not multiplying it out or anything crazy, but you divide 300,000 into 100,000 worth of sales, and you come up with 3. You multiply it by 30 days, and you got a 90-day supply. That 3 means you got 3 months. You multiply it by 30 days, you got a 90-day supply. You take a $500,000 inventory at cost and divide it into 250, and again, now you come up with 2.0, that's 2 months, multiply it by 30, a 60-day supply. It's really that simple. So anyway, I'll pause for a second to see if anyone has any questions. Feel free in the chat box to add any questions that you might, or anything like that. Kaylee, Blake, you got anything to add that maybe I've missed so far?
No, I think this is great. I was kind of wondering, I don't know if this is a realistic question, but is there any guidance you could provide for having conversations with the dealer and the GM that was trained to look at this information differently?
Well, the next slide's coming up. We'll do a lot of that.
Oh, good.
So,
Okay.
So, it's a good question, Kaylee. So many times, remember, and I always, I've had slides on this over the last 25 years. It's called dealerese versus partsees. As parts managers, most of us have been trained to look at the months no sale, look at the inventory that way. Whereas the dealers, they go to these 20 groups and they're looking at it based on an investment, return on investment, and whatnot. And so the collision is, and I've always said this, I used to have my dealer come back from 20 groups and I'd schedule my vacations around it, because I'd sit down with him for 2 or 3 hours and he would show me numbers that I just had no clue what he was talking about. It was like talking a different language. So some of the times when you get some of these calculations or figures, to be able to break it down simply to here's my day's supply, here's my turns, and look at that. That's really where we're going at here so that you can get on the same page. So with that being said, I'll move on now to this next slide. This is a good way, after we go to the next slides and show you the individual ones based on your DMS, which I'll go through very quickly. But this one here's a slide with a gross turn that really gives you a clear picture on inventory efficiency. Okay, quite simply right here, we're just looking at net sales, that 399, 345 times 12. So 4,525,000. And now we're dividing into the cost, and it's 11.33 turns. Now, one of the things that we did is we went out and we took this inventory and we took out their obsolescence, their 13 months and greater, that was not rim controlled or whatever. We subtracted that back out. And of course, now, once you remove the obsolescence, now you do that same calculation of 4,525,000 divided into the net sales at cost of 352,000. And the next thing you know, they're at 12.84 turns. So you can see how much having idle inventory, how that can affect your terms on a day-to-day basis. How to improve gross turns and return on investment? Well, reduce obsolescence. Look at your excess inventory. We saw some day supply go up and turns go down a couple of years ago, and some of you may be General Motors and you're on here. We also had with Chrysler as well. You guys went through a strike, and the depots closed down, and there was a lot of trading amongst dealers and whatnot. But you went through about 2.5 months, and before that, what a lot of dealers did is they stocked up on maintenance items and built a lot of excess inventory. Hence, by building that excess 90 or 120 days supply into those maintenance items, of course, what happened? Their days supply increased and their turns dropped. And so as they've receded back to a normal process, one of the things that's, again, where looking at that last slide and be able to pull out that idle inventory value and really, measure, how effectively is my really active, productive inventory? How's it turning? Is really a simple question. So the other thing is just making sure to stock the right mix of fast-moving parts to meet demand. Somewhere between a 30 to 60 days supply is ideal. I try to tell everybody that if you're carrying more depth in inventory, up around 90 days or whatnot on maintenance items, you got too much depth, and you really don't need that. So I've got a question here from Gordy. Gordy, he says, when you look at inventory, should you use the DMS actual from the extended value report or use accounting numbers? We have a large body shop, so my WIP is around 100,000. Gordy, what DMS do you happen to be on? If you could type that in the box there. Reynolds. Okay. So in your Reynolds WIP, one of the things you got to remember is if it's already on an invoice and it's in the WIP, that's actually going to be reflected in your sales. So you don't have to worry about your WIP. So the extended value report that you get in your 2213, and I'm going to show you a slide here in a minute, that will accurately calculate it out. When you've got parts in the WIP, if you've got them billed out and they're sitting on a repair order, obviously they're not out of accounting, but they get clocked through your sales in your parts department. So you don't have to worry about taking the WIP cost to add it back in to calculate that out. That's a great question, Gordy. So moving forward now I'm going to briefly show you, I'm going to go through each DMS that we got to just show you where you would pull these numbers and how you would calculate them. And again, I won't spend a ton of time on this because once we're done with this, you can request this PowerPoint and easily go to the slide that has your DMS slide, okay? So this is CDK where you're using the annual activity and benchmark report, and the two calculations are pretty much laid right out there. Off to the right-hand side is where you can sit and calculate out the last 12 months net sales divided in to your last 12-month inventory average off to the right there. It's that easy. Then when you're calculating out your days supply setting using the same sheet and the same current month, you divide your parts cost into your net sales for that month, to actual calculate and show you, I got a 59.4 days supply. So it's not like you got to pull 3 or 4 separate reports on CDK to come out with this number. Right in your annual activity and benchmark report, going to the grand total, you can now calculate both those figures and come out very accurately. And when you go to the bottom of the report and you look at those true turns, do not pay attention to that because it means absolutely nothing. They're depending on how things got clocked through the system, can make a big difference. Now with Reynolds and Reynolds, or DealerTrack first, I'm sorry, Reynolds is next, Gordy. We're getting there. This is Reynolds, I'm sorry. With Reynolds, you can see that it's right in your 2213 report where they do have year-to-date out there and total cost of sales, but don't utilize that number because that's just year-to-date. That's basically January through, July, and here what you want to do is take that month-to-date number and multiply it by 12. That gives you an estimated annual sales to divide it back into the investment. But then what's really simple is now these two numbers, you just take the sales and divide it back into the total investment to get this day's supply. So you're basically taking the top number times 12 and divided it into the bottom number. Then you're taking the top number and divided it into the bottom number to get your day's supply. Pretty simple. With DealerTrack, and it befuddles me where they come out with their calculations because right up top, they'll show your month's supply and your turn rate. If you look at the very top here, I've got July isolated, and August is a running month to date. So that really skews your averages off to the right because it's throwing in that, you're in the middle of August right now and it throws that off. But one of the things here is you can take that 335,000 it costs times 12 and divide it back into the 594. And as you can see, I come up with 6.77 terms. I mean, I'm not a math genius, but it's pretty easy to calculate this. Where they come up with 1.7 turns up top, if you're not scratching your head, I certainly did, okay? Now when you go back and divide, the 594,000 in inventory into the monthly sales, you come up with a day's supply of 53.1 days. So right here, this is from the management trend analysis with DealerTrack. Easy to calculate that number out. Now with Tekion, they actually have 2 canned reports, detailed sales report. You can go in and isolate your date range. Like the month of July, that's what I did here. I was able to take the detailed sales report and say, show me all extended cost, sale, and gross profit for the month of July. And then they had a detailed extended value report, which was easy to run. And I could put the two together and calculate out their actual turns and their days supply. And again, these are 2 easy to run canned reports if any of you happen to be on Tekion. Now, the best one is the next slide. If any of you happen to be on PBS, they actually do a perfect job here when it comes to actually calculating your turns. It's the inventory management allowance report on the program. They actually take your monthly cost of goods sold. I went in and just isolated July. They multiplied it out by 12. They did the actual extension based on the current month cost of sales, divided it back in to their month-end inventory value, and it calculates out the 3.06 turns. So here's a DMS vendor that does that. Now, the day supply, they didn't really have that calculated out, but it was really easy because these two numbers calculate out. In this particular case, it's a newer dealer just getting going that we're working with. So you see this 117-day supply, and a lot of it is they're just starting to generate sales as a new store. So you could look at that and, oh my gosh, this guy has a 4-month supply in inventory. And considering he hasn't been in business that long, would be one of the reasons I wouldn't get too excited for a while. But if you've got that much in inventory, that many days supply, you got a lot of depth and or idle inventory. With DealerBuilt, you have to go run the inventory sales report and then the closing inventory, which shows you a beginning and ending number, calculated out. Again, I won't spend a lot of time here, but two simple reports. You can lay them side by side and make a very accurate calculation that you need to make. And lastly, we have Automate. And Automate, really easy. Their inventory management report gives you your total inventory value, your total sales at cost, and allows you to very easily calculate it times 12, divide it back, and then turn around and divide that 176 into 119 to see that, they got a 44-day supply. So hopefully, just looking at this, and remember, if you didn't get all of this going through it, and I hit one of your 6 DMSs, just request the PowerPoint and go to the slide, and you can figure it out pretty easy from that point. We wanted to make this very simple for any DMS on anyone who was listening, so that you could accurately calculate out the two most critical numbers, as far as I'm concerned, with controlling an inventory that you need. Remember, I told you that the turns, you want to be somewhere around 6 to 8 turns. Well, with day supply, I get that asked. And, NADA's had this out here, and I think it's just a canned answer. So they say a 45-day supply is what you really need in an inventory to be efficient. So if you could be at 8 turns and 45-day supply, and I bring this up because look at this Automate store. They're right where the NADA standards would see. They're at 8 turns and a 44-day supply. So you could use this slide as a benchmark. But you know what? We see efficient inventories that might have as much as a 55-day supply, but they're still very efficient, and their turns are up around 7.5, 8. To me, that means you've got some breadth in your inventory, because ultimately that's what you want to do, is satisfy your shop, satisfy your customers. Where we see turns tend to go down a little bit is if you're really large in wholesale and you're trying to cover a broad spectrum of collision and garage people, turns tend to go down because they're working on older vehicles, you're carrying a bigger breadth, whereas you're doing a lot of shop or a lot of work within your shop and a lot of maintenance work. So that's where we tend to see, when you control your inventory, that's where we tend to see turns go up and days supply go down, just based on the way you do business. So what causes low turns or a high day supply? Again, I've said this 3 times, but this slide bears repeating. Too much idle inventory, such as depth, maybe a 6-month supply on oil filters and air filters, when you really realistically could live with a 90-day supply. Obsolete inventory, it still tends to be the number one thing that everybody wants to talk about. This day and age, with the ASRs and very little opportunity to return obsolete inventory, it becomes a big deal. Finally, forced stock or unfulfilled demand. Make sure the tail isn't wagging the dog, AKA what you order is really needed in the shop. That's really critical to help control day supply and inventory efficiency and turns. So, so some of the things you could do to do this, of course, to be proactive to help you is, are you sourcing or structuring your parts so that it really reflects a true demand? Kind of the question you had, Gordy, making sure, do I include my WIP or not include my WIP? Is this really an accurate number I can sink my teeth into and trust? I've yet to find out of those slides I did something inaccurate that doesn't work for them. Are too many parts being ordered on demand instead of being stocked proactively? One of the things with ASR programs, if you're 99% compliant, especially with a couple of the with the manufacturers, you're in business for them. GM and Chrysler clients, the parts managers, they've coined this phrase, one hit wonders. They get one demand, they post a lot of sale. The next thing you know, it comes up and they got to take 8.5, 9 out of every 10 parts. And if you're taking everything and you just bypass it, you're carrying a lot of what I would call unfulfilled demand. And there is some on ASRs. The good news is you get to send it back. With Chrysler, it's 12 months. With GM, it's 18 months now after that strike. But you got to keep it on your shelf for 18 months. And we see that about 30% of the parts that end up in a aero or rim controlled inventory, 30 to 40% of that will age out. So in other words, it's better on your shelf than on the manufacturer's depot. They kind of use you as many depots, and that can hurt your efficiency to some degree. So I always say stay a couple of percent above. If you got to be 85%, hang around 87. If you got to be 90%, hang around 92. And I'm preaching to the choir, but most of you already know, go get the cheapest parts that you can to make sure you hit it, not putting a lot of expensive things on the shelf. And just make sure there's structured processes to prevent obsolescence. And this really focuses back into, are you getting a lot of returns from wholesale customers, especially body shops? Is the special order process really in place to make sure technicians aren't really going crazy and over ordering? That's something that you really want to make sure of. There you go with that. The next thing, because we mentioned it in here, the flaw or the real problem with the DMS fill rate. You can go out and look at your MGRs and it'll show, hey, I got an 85, 90% fill rate. And that sounds really good. But a lot of times what we find, it could be due to the way you sort or receipt your parts into your inventory. You want to have a 100% fill rate on a couple of these DMS systems. Just receipt everything in as a stock order. It'll show you 100% fill rate. Typically what we see, and I'll show you the next slide, which really bears this to truth, is most people, if you can hit a 60 to 65% off the shelf fill rate, you're being realistic and you're calculating it right. Understanding the fill rate with the right formula is simply parts sold from stock divided into total parts sold. So again, how you receive parts in can definitely skew this, and the type of business really matters. And that's what the next slide is going to show you here. This is what I really try to point out when it comes to calculating a true fill rate. As we've looked at it and been able to isolate it to a degree, and we have never really delved to the point that we've drilled into this, I figured DMS vendors at some point, with technology and breakouts and sales the way they are, and the data that's available, how many of you really think your customer pay sales are above 90%? If you're doing a lot of maintenance work in your shop and whatnot, I'm going to tell you that your customer pay fill rate more than likely is somewhere around 90 to 98%. That's where you're going to have by far your best fill rate. Now we get to internal sales. A lot of internal sales are done with new car accessories or reconning cars or whatnot, I would tend to think that all of a sudden the fill rate now falls back into probably an average, 60 to 70%. Now comes the kicker, warranty sales. If you have a fill rate on warranty parts, 25 to 30%, you're doing a great job. Why? Warranty cars, new cars are just starting to fail. You're testing the parts. You don't have a crystal ball that tells you what's going to fail on this new model vehicle till they start failing. So you're testing the parts. This is where most of your special orders are coming from and whatnot. Warranty fill rates, if you could isolate it and really look at it, I would challenge to see anybody who's more than 25 to 30%. Then we get to counter retail sales. That's a very small portion of most people's business anymore. And then another low fill rate, more than likely, especially if you're large into collision or whatnot, is going to be wholesale. So if you can't calculate a fill rate based on each one of these profit centers, you're jumbling it all into one ball based on how you're receiving and what you're doing. That's not too good. Now there's a couple of reports out there. If you're on Reynolds, they have a repair order fill rate. And then with CDK, they actually have one, but you have to turn it on. It's called RPFR, repair order fill rate. RPFR. That'll at least look at your repair orders and come up with a fairly accurate fill rate, kind of breaking down at least one area of the profit center, that being RO sales. Here's a sample, or, here's exactly what I was talking about, where, the fill rate benchmarks by business type, again, warranty, 35%, would be off the planet great, internal around 50, wholesale 50 to 60. Again, customer pay maintenance, hey, boy, you want to see a tech go to the service manager or the writer? Be out of a air filter or a set of brake pads. Typically you're going to get your butt chewed by the service department because you didn't have it. Some of the red flags that you might want to look at when you're looking at this is an increase in those emergency or special orders, or techs frequently waiting on common parts. That's what you really care about when it comes to looking at the fill rate and whatnot. One DMS has a halfway decent way of looking at it. This happens to be DealerTrack. They have a fill rate report that shows you total demand filled from the shelf, which just shows 85%. But one of the things that I find to be more accurate is filmed this, if it was from the shelf and now you look to the next column, the same day fill rate is only 5.42%, but 85% off the shelf. Sometimes I got to scratch my head on that and go, okay, do they just keep cars in the shop for a lot longer than everybody else? But one of the things I do like is if you're using the special order feature, it really shows 9.1% of their fill rate is coming from special orders that were placed. So, for those of you that might be listening that happen to be DealerTrack, they have the best canned one that I've seen so far. But again, if you can break out your profit centers and look at fill rates based on each one of those centers, it should be dynamically different. Throwing everything into just one big ball or one big data set and trying to calculate out fill rates, again, based on the way you're receiving parts or not receiving parts, can make a big difference. So until the DMS has come out with a very accurate fill rate report, when I hear people start to talk about fill rates, I just cringe because I haven't seen anybody who has come with the perfect accurate way to do it. So there you go. I promised 40 minutes and I'm at 46. So hopefully this will help to educate you and come up with an easy way to calculate turns and days supply. To me, the two most critical management factors that you can look at.
And Chuck, we have a question from
Yeah.
Chris. Yeah, he was asking, how do you isolate parts sold from stock on Tekion?
How do you isolate parts sold from stock on Techeon? Chris, I don't know, but I can find out. Uh, if going back on the slides here, and more than likely, I would assume Chris with Tekion, and I'm blasting back through here, calculating out on Tekion. Here's a detailed sales report, Chris. I would assume you could isolate, and I think you can isolate your stock sources and exclude those SPO sources and probably come out with a pretty pretty good detailed sales report. And I know one of the things that they do have, Chris, because I've used it, is Tekion does have sales by source. And it'll show you your cost of sale, your sale, and your gross based on your individual sources. So you can pick like your ASR source, for Nissan, it's like source 101, and look at that detailed source report, and then look at the extended value in source 101 and get a great calculation based on, how am I doing there from a turn standpoint, how's the ASR 2.0 with Nissan working, or if you want to then run a detailed sales report on all sources and isolate just your stock sources and divide the two in, that'll give you a pretty good fill rate. Hopefully that answers your question. But one of the things I can tell you, Chris, it's a canned report out there. It's really cool, and it's called Sales by Source. You can put a date range in, and that should help you. And thanks, you bet, Chris. No problem. Kaylee, anything else before we
No,
wrap this up?
I don't see any other questions. Just want to make sure we shout out the next topic next month. Oh, I forgot to update the date. It's going to be we always tend to do them the second Thursday of each month. So that will be September 11th. And we're going to focus on inventory health and your guide to optimal parts management.
Didn't we just do that?
Yeah, we kind
Day
of
supply and turns? Oh, you mean there's more? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, this was just more of like how we break out the inventory. So productive, excess, forced, kind of going over how we look at the
Okay.
inventory through our reports. Um,
I'm just teasing
but
you, Kaylee. There you go.
yeah, no, I know. But we are also open to suggestions. If we're not covering some topics that you think we should cover, please let us know. But I will have this recording out to everyone, and yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. I hope these are helping to educate you and make you a better parts manager or fixed ops director or whatever. Love doing it. Love educating us. There's so many new people in this business and things are changing so drastically. We love to at least help you to some degree. So thank you, everybody. And I hope you have a great month. Good luck and good selling.
Thank you.